So, the latest in the already diverse roster of legends brings the master of this black ferrofluid substance.
Look no further than Tressa Crystal Smith, aka Catalyst. Greetings from the dark side of the moon.
Catalyst is the new defensive legend that quickly manipulates the battlefield, offering fantastic support for her team. Her passive allows her to barricade existing doors, strengthening it from certain types of damage, more specifically doubling its protection from 2 melee hits to 4, guaranteeing success if you need to do things like pop a bat behind it. If the door has been destroyed, then she can create a new blockade in any spaces where a door once was, matching the strength of a regular door being 2 melee attacks, but a barricade that cannot be opened and closed. For tactical, Catalyst throws out a horizontal line of fluid a short to medium range in front of her, essentially throwing down a spike trap, which lays dormant initially and will turn into this spiky boy whenever an enemy comes close to it, causing 15 damage per tick whilst also slowing them. And finally, her ultimate allows her to raise a huge opaque wall going in the direction she's facing that reaches relatively far and doesn't act as a physical barrier, so it can be shot through and throwables can also cross. However, enemies that run through it will be slowed and partially blinded. Now that's the overview, but now we get into the useful details about her kit, how best to use it, and then most importantly for some, how to play against it. We'll start off with the details you need to know about her passive barricade. Firstly, you can only reinforce or make 2 sets of doors at a time. This specifically means door spaces. So for example, these double doors count as 1. When you try to barricade a 3rd space, the first barricade will be removed. The cooldown on a single door seems to be about 4 seconds, so if you put one up only to have it break straight away, then you'll have to wait a few seconds to reapply. The good thing is there's no actual ability cooldown, so outside of that reapplication window, you can keep doing this forever. Be aware that like normal doors, even a reinforced one will be destroyed in one go from the likes of throwables and fused tactical, so it's still important to be cautious when behind one. Catalyst's piercing strikes have a 24-second cooldown, and she can hold 2 charges at a time. The range you can throw the tactical is pretty reasonable, just slightly less than your standard throwable equipment. The fluid itself, once thrown across the ground, is activated by any enemy presence, and as far as we know will stay on the ground indefinitely unless replaced or destroyed. Similarly to the limit of the barricade passive, piercing spikes has a limit of 3, so once the 4th ability is thrown, the first one will disappear. An important observation of this ability is when it's activated, you can see this little core pop up. Destroy the core and you destroy the trap. The trap itself doesn't seem to care about object collision, meaning when thrown perpendicular to a door, you can create some of that spiky boy action on the other side of it, whilst keeping the core safely on the inside. If you place the trap poorly or decided one is no longer required, you have the option to pick it back up again to regain a charge for use elsewhere, making it a bit more tricky for nearby enemies to rotate around your defenses. Then we have the ultimate, which is yet more environmental manipulation, and has a lot more benefits than initially meets the eye. So as mentioned, you produce an opaque wall starting from yourself and going reasonably far. It's up for 30 seconds and has a cooldown of 2 minutes. The wall will go through large structures, but depending on the environment will rise up against smaller objects as stepping stones, or step downwards if used at a cliff edge, for example. Enemies are blinded and slowed briefly when they walk through it, and your allies actually get slowed too a little when they're going through yours, so bear that in mind when executing your engage on another team, and because of this it leans more to suiting defensive play. The beauty of this ability is it grants immunity against scans, the scan meta being something particularly unpopular amongst certain crowds, although there is some nuance you'll need to be aware of to not be caught off guard. If someone is scanned before the wall is put between enemy teams, then that visibility is maintained even through the wall. This actually includes pinging enemies beforehand too. The abilities that grant vision but are not technically scanned still work, the main culprit being Seer's ult, which will give you visibility throughout the whole duration of the wall being up. And also note that Maggie's tag vision passive also works through the wall too. When it comes to making the most of her kit, I'll just mention that Catalyst by default is immune to other enemy Catalyst abilities. Now let's first focus on door plays, as her whole kit plays into this nicely, with loads of potential to control indoor spaces and outplay your opponents. I've mentioned how reinforcing doors with your passive provides the time to pop a bat, for example, and it actually offers the flexibility for many different options. Meleeing a reinforced door as a single person 4 times will provide enough time to instantly pop a bat, medkit, phoenix, or even res your ally with time to spare to do something extra like shield swap or just more frantic panicking. Reinforcing also gives your team sole control of opening and closing it, meaning the enemy must break the door to come through. This means you'll always have the option to do quick peeks and get free damage off, made even easier when combined with your perpendicular tactical to ward off enemies blocking the other side. Due to this advantage, it's advised that you take a good bursty close range weapon in your loadout to capitalize the most on those holding the other side. Dare I say it, but these advantages make her extremely strong at hot dropping, controlling doors when no one has the tools besides melee to deal with it, as well as traps dealing a high proportion of damage as everyone most likely still has white shields. Catalyst really does seem to be the master escapist, as every ability and effect she has really aids that function. Barricading and trapping a door ensures that they cannot catch up to you before you've escaped around a corner or pop the meds you needed. Doing this needs to be second nature to deal with various pushes, as it can be carried out very quickly. The effectiveness of Catalyst kit reduces when you're out in the open, mainly due to the tactical and ult being very positional. So whilst it can be used effectively anywhere, it's much harder to take advantage of when you can't also utilize nearby structures to keep enemies at bay easily. The key is being aware of the ability's limitations, like scan immunity and preempting the enemy push. If the team are on the back foot and I'm attempting to stop a push, I could always follow up my ult by lining the area I predict they'll cross with my spike traps. This will slow them considerably, deal damage and blind them. From here, I like to be mindful that if anyone steps through and onto the trap, I'll be ready to beam them instantly to turn the fight around. Otherwise, if the situation becomes more complicated, it will still aid in a safer retreat. Be sure to make use of how annoying a tactical can be at manipulating terrain, preventing enemy revives, stopping them from using their teammates' down shield for cover, and just generally blocking off good positions to the enemy. Even if they aren't necessarily on the trap, it will reduce their options considerably during the fight. Some subtle uses for Catalyst Tactical is that it provides enemy detection, letting you and your team know if someone is still camping the wall next to it, for example, and the audio when it activates will also provide awareness of the enemy positioning. From an offensive perspective, the trap's noise while activated can lightly mask the audio from your flank on their position, but to the contrary can also obscure enemy movement audio for you and your team too. So we now know that her kit is incredibly powerful when used right. But what's the plan when we come across such a legend? Well, we can't cry to the forums about her, because that privilege is solely owned by Seer right now, so we better do something else. The first tip is to pick Catalyst yourself. As well as being immune to the ferrofluid effects of the enemy Catalyst, having the same defensive kit allows you to effectively trade cooldowns with her. In this instance, we're approaching a team from low ground, while also racing to get to the next circle. The enemy Catalyst walls off vision while rotating to the cover we were heading to. Being able to provide our own cover gave us the time to get to the buildings unscathed, where we eventually took them out. Also, Bloodhunter here got a cheeky scan through the wall, and I've no idea how. The next thing is, if you're a Catalyst fighting inside close quarters against another Catalyst team, one of the first things you need to instinctually do is take control of the doors between you with Barricade. This is a useful approach against any team, but more so in this scenario because it denies their Catalyst the opportunity to do so first. Once you've sludged it up, their Catalyst team will no longer be able to open and close the doors. Some of the other legend abilities are reasonable counters to the situations Catalyst presents. Those that also alter the immediate environment, like Jibby Dome or Newcastle ult, acts as a sort of block to Catalyst wall. So if it's up already, you might be able to safely stay in place when you see it coming. Horizon's Tactical and Valk's Jetpack offer versatile verticality to avoid traps or peek over the wall. Horizon's is particularly useful as the wall blocks their visibility of you too, so if executed with the right timing, it can end up being a decent surprise push. Again, with verticality in mind, scanning with Crypto's drone from above is also a workable way around this wall mechanic too. And finally, if you're really wanting to play it safe, maybe you're aiming for high placement for the RP gains, then much like you would a Caustic or Wattson hunkered up, consider out-rotating a team with Catalyst holding a building, until the circle forces them into a mid-range fight where her ability use is not nearly as effective. A bit of a sweaty tactic, but hey, some of us are. When it comes to what your mates can play around your Catalyst pick, there are a few trains of thought that might seem logical to go with her kit. Locking people inside buildings and nading will be an effective strategy at times, which pairs well with Fused, who can carry twice as many throwables along with his tactical for tight spaces too, and Horizon, whose playstyle already naturally revolves around catching enemies in her ult and following up with throwables. Then we have Seer for visibility of the trap team to get the essential angles. Actually, in general, Seer pairs incredibly well, as his ult is one of the few enemy tracking abilities that works after Catalyst wall is already up, and the combo is so easily executed. Seer is very meta anyway, and thanks to his heirloom being on the way, he'll probably stay meta for a while. The pairing is so good at the moment, and the latest ranked map is full of indoor close quarters fights. The outside having many opportunities to just fast travel between these smaller areas, so they're both in a great spot right now. The last note about viability is about Catalyst's immunity to other Catalyst abilities. This means if she's meta, she'll be everywhere, as having her becomes even more invaluable to counter the advantages of the other teams, kind of how having Jibby became in pro play. Well, I hope this provided the best start for everything you need to know to get going with Catalyst. Her kit is really unique, and she just might shake up the meta as people learn to use her kit more effectively. Just remember, we play games for fun, so if it stresses you too much, cool off, touch grass, and when you do play to win.